enjoying hearing these different faiths express themselves and hearing the common themes, and it really gives me hope for the future of faith, as you were talking about. So you've just got me. I did half of a slide presentation and gave up. It was too stressful, and it's just another layer of technology. So it's just me, and my talk is called Birthing the Holy. I want to start a bit differently by inviting us into a few meditative moments. We're hearing so many words, and I'd like to invite you just to sit, close your eyes if you're comfortable, settle in your chairs, feel your bottom on the seat, your feet on the floor, your shoulders relaxed, and just have a slightly more conscious connection to your breath. We've been hearing a bit about breath and how it's the thing that connects us to ourselves. It connects us to each other in this room. It connects us to everything in creation. And there's some idea that we are still breathing. I don't think it's an idea. We're breathing the same breath that Jesus would have breathed, the same air. So a few slower breaths. And then to allow to arise within you, either within your mind memory or within your body memory, a memory of love. A memory or the sensation of love, what love feels like. And this could be a psychedelic induced experience that you're remembering, or of being with a loved one, or of an experience in the natural world, or perhaps of music, but the feeling of love. Notice how that feels in your body. And try and just hold that connection, and then open to the realization that everyone in this room is having that experience. And so we're each having our own experience, but love connects us. And into that connectedness and that interconnectedness, I'm going to drop a short prayer. Radiant Mother of Life, come garden with me. Help me clear space within the clutter of my heart to grow a home for you. In my heart garden, bring to abundance the fruits of desire and love, deeply rooted in and for the earth. Let me receive from your breast all I need for this garden to flourish. And may your fecundity be the ground from which I grow. Amen. Thank you for participating in that. Today is Good Friday, as it happens. It's the day that commemorates the crucifixion of Jesus, which stands at the heart of the Christian tradition. It's also the anniversary of the Good Friday experiment, which some of you may know of. It happened in 1962, so before even I was born, in a church basement in Boston. On Good Friday, they got a bunch of theology students. They might have been training for ordination, I'm not sure about that. And they gave them a high dose of psilocybin, while above them in the church, Howard Thurman was preaching the Good Friday sermon, and it was broadcast into the basement so they could hear it. It was the first experiment, I think, unless you count the Last Supper as one, of combining Christianity with psychedelics. So on this Good Friday, I'm here to introduce the possibility of a fruitful, juicy, and possibly loving collaboration between psychedelics and Christianity. A collaboration that's already happening in the hidden corners of each of these communities, as well as in academia. And also, I want to introduce the insights of the ancient tradition of something called spiritual direction, which has wonderful wisdom to offer psychedelic academia, research, and practice. I began with that meditation and prayer because all good spirituality begins with love. And Christianity in particular affirms that God is love, although I accept that's not always how it's presented. The prayer was an extract from my personal Lord's Prayer, which Jesus taught his disciples, the one which usually begins, "Our Father, which art in heaven." My version, with the help of the Sufi scholar Neil Douglas Klotz, and I have to say some mushrooms, is drawn from the Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. It turns out that alongside its cosmic breadth, it's also a deeply ecological and earthy prayer with feminine undertones. It's a prayer that brings the heavenly together with the earthly, the eternal with the temporal. And in this more authentic version, it reveals some of the core themes that were present right at the beginning of the Christian story. If you're intrigued by it, I've got postcards that I'm really happy for you to take afterwards. But having said that, about that, the Lord's Prayer, for much of my life, I felt the need to be a good Christian girl. Too good at times. It hasn't always served me well. Not questioning the conservative, more fear-based version of faith I grew up with. Although it's also true that we had a lot of fun, and it's perhaps not the worst way to grow up. But put another way, God is the question my life has revolved around. And as I and my faith matured, I took the question of God into conversations with anyone I could corner. I took it into my reading, I took it into my academic study, into my psychological inquiry and my therapy training, into my spiritual direction journey, and into my prayer. Like doors opening into new rooms, the question of God developed and expanded over time. But the felt experience of God was somewhat elusive. I had hints, I had moments, but it was psychedelics that have opened me up to the feeling of God, or rather, the feeling of the love that moves the universe. So, I'm now a somewhat less good Christian girl who does drugs. Yay, yeah. I also facilitate others to take them, as Mark introduced. We hold Christic retreats in the Netherlands that offer a psychedelic journey within the container of Christian Eucharist and Christian prayers. I've not long returned from the second retreat that we've run. And our facilitation team consists of therapists, spiritual directors, and a priest. I'm one of the therapists, and I'm also one of the spiritual directors. So I'm not here, I'm feeling this a bit, I'm not here as an academic or a theologian, but as someone with a certain experience and knowing about a spiritual tradition and practice, as well as a certain experience in psychedelics. Did Jesus do mushrooms? I like to think he could have. And maybe he did, and there are people inquiring into that. You might know the Immortality Key and Brian Murarescu. But we don't yet really know. But whether he did or not, many of his followers today are. Priests are tripping and returning to their congregations with a revitalised faith. Ordinary people are discovering the great more that the saints speak of. Among those are people who, with no background or familiarity with the Christian story, are encountering it, or the person of Jesus on their journeys, or just generally encountering some mysterious and holy feeling something, or someone, and they have no idea what to do with that. Helpfully, it turns out that within the Christian tradition, as flawed and disappointing as its institutional self shows itself to be at times, runs a golden, mystical, and contemplative thread that is beautifully equipped to be in service to our contemporary psychedelic experiences, whether or not they are overtly Christian in nature. This is not about converting anyone. It's just wanting to be of service to the field. My own mushroom experiences have taken me deep into this mystical thread. Some have presented a feminine, motherly, divine presence to me in labor for the world. I felt like I've been on a maternity ward. As Meister Eckhart, a 13th century Christian mystic, said, "What does God do all day? God lies on a maternity bed, giving birth eternally." He said that in the 13th century. On another occasion, I found myself with Jesus on the cross, which became the place where all the oppositional forces of human life, good and evil, birth and death, male and female, the time-bound and the eternal, were reconciled. It became the broken middle that the scholar Gillian Rose spoke of. At some point, I asked Jesus where his mother was, because we know that she was at the foot of the cross, and I couldn't see her. And he said to me, "She's up here with me, as any good mother would be." More recently, I took the first draft of this talk, which I thought I had crafted beautifully, into an encounter with 3 grams of mushrooms. And they not only threw it up in the air, they turned my theology and cosmology inside out. Leonard Cohen sang, "There's a crack in everything, it's how the light gets in." And Bayo Akomolafe, who some of you may know, talks about our need to live in the cracks of our current domination system. So anyway, in my recent journey, I fell into the crack, and I now have it on good authority that the crack is a vagina, the cosmos is a womb, and the cosmic project is the holy birthing itself, a project we are each invited into. They always deliver, don't they, those mushrooms? And this idea of the cosmos being a womb might not be original to me, but oh boy, the felt experience of it was mind-blowing. That trip also deepened the theme of mothering being at the core of the cosmos through the person of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who I keep encountering, which is more surprising to me than anything, because I'm a good Protestant girl and she's never played much of a part in my life. But she's turning up repeatedly. I want to meet Mary Magdalene, but I keep meeting Mary, the mother of Jesus. So I'll return to that dramatic cosmic vision in a bit. But let's just notice something. The stories at the heart of Christianity are ones of birth and death. And psychedelics propel us into those stories too. So there's an immediate link. And this is perhaps because they're not just discrete, once-off historical events of Jesus' life or of our lives. They are the core archetypal experiences, not just of being human, but of all life and the cosmos at large. So I had thought I was on my way out of the Christian story. Frankly, I'd got a bit bored with it all, and I wasn't finding life there. And its current institutional self, as I've said, just seems so poorly equipped. Don't get so cross with the church. Poorly equipped to serve our world. But my mushroom journeys have brought me right back into its mystical heart. And I have felt myself invited into that mothering, birthing, reconciling service to the world. The evidence, both personally and in what I read in the research, is that psychedelics handled with care and respect can free us and have freed me from the suffering constraints of a rule-bound, hierarchical, dogmatic, and fearful approach to the spiritual life. And the fact that I'm standing here delivering this talk is proof of that. But let's face it, most people at this conference will have thrown Christianity out of the window if they ever gave it thought in the first place. We're living in a post-Christian era, and the type of Christianity that has any profile in the public's awareness is no longer fit for purpose, in my mind. It's colluded for too long with the powers of domination, colonialism, exclusivism, and capitalism, and frankly, much of it is boring and irrelevant. It took the beautiful original stories of our connection to the earth and of the divine feminine nature woven throughout the God story and literally paved over it all with temples and cathedrals and rigid dogma. So I believe psychedelics can help blow up all that institutional paving and return us to our true roots, to rebirth the holy in us, uncovering and recovering the old stories. And my hope is that more and more Christians will open to their teaching. Pat McCabe, an Indigenous American woman who's one of my heroes, says, "We don't need a new story, we just need to tell the old story in a new way." So, I hope I've got time for this. What can Christianity do for psychedelics? One of the impetuses for offering this talk was that I often listen to or read psychedelic practitioners who are saying, we need to find ways to help people process their psychedelic spiritual experiences. And I think you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a ready-made tradition waiting in the wings that has deep wisdom about these things. It's a wisdom that's held by the mystics, and that includes Jesus and the Old and New Testament prophets and poets. But they're people who are comfortable with uncertainty, are curious and open-minded, who live in the liminal space between the eternal and the earthly, and who find at the deepest level common ground with other mystical paths and traditions. They're a motley crew of characters that we call saints, who saw through the institution and the dogma to the heart of the divine, and who I suspect would have been at home in the more wacky corners of this conference. Not necessarily because these would have been their practices, but because they were invariably big-hearted, deeply loving, open-minded, with, I suspect, remarkable neuroplasticity. And they were curious about both human nature and the nature of the divine. And they understood what modern neuroscientists are only now catching up with, that we become what we contemplate and what we are immersed in. They also understand what I think quantum physics, I hesitate to mention that, but is leaning towards, that there is something going on. We're not just a collection of random atoms, molecules, galaxies, planets, whatever. And they were familiar with what we call the disturbance of mystical experience. And not only in its ecstatic form, but in its experiences of darkness and confusion and doubt and mental torment. And they've developed this body of wisdom around discernment about how do we try and make sense or live with these experiences that we have. There are some modern contemporary writers and thinkers, and I won't have time to go into this at all, but Teilhard de Chardin is worth looking into. Thomas Merton, Sally McVeigh, who has a theology of the earth being the body of God, liberation, queer, and process theology. Sally Douglas is my latest discovery. She has a thesis of Jesus being the embodiment of the divine feminine. And many of these people had experiences that can't be distinguished from the records of psychedelic experiences. Houston Smith, who was a member of that group in the Boston church, famously said, if you take a psychedelic and you have a mystical experience, you still have done no more than glimpsed the promised land. You have not become a citizen of it. This 6,000-year-old Judeo-Christian tradition can help make us citizens of the land that we glimpse in our experiences. It's founded on personal experiences of people who've lived and immersed and dug deep into these things. They did it by fasting and praying. Maybe they did it by eating mushrooms, but we don't quite know. There are practices within this tradition that teach us how to prepare for our encounters, how to sit in them or with people in them, and how to process and integrate them afterwards. I keep mentioning spiritual direction, so just quickly. It can also be called spiritual accompaniment or soul friendship, and at its best, it's a distillation of this wisdom tradition, applied to practical daily life. And I've been going to a spiritual director for 30 years on and off, well, pretty much every month, actually. And that's where I've processed my life. It's different to therapy because they have also listened for the movement of the divine in my life. And my current director, who has no experience of psychedelics, has still been able to sit and listen and accept and help me live and work with them. It's work that I now do, and I now do it for Ligare. I heard Hunt Priest, who set up Ligare, talk before I even had a psychedelic experience, and he said, spiritual direction needs to be at the heart of this work. And so even before I'd experienced psychedelics, I knew I wanted to be in this field doing this work. So there you have it, last paragraph. My proposal here and my personal experience is that psychedelics can help us Christians to uncover and recover those old, hidden and excluded stories, and that unless we step up to that, we deserve to be discarded and disregarded. On the other hand, woven through the history of the Judeo-Christian tradition are people and practices that are there waiting to help and support these experiences. If my vision of the cosmos as a womb and as a place of birthing has any veracity to it, it seems to me that the world is in a place of contraction at the moment, in need of good birthing guidance. My hope is that Christianity and psychedelics can offer this to each other, to be playful lovers that can birth more of the holy into our world so in need of it. Thank you for listening.